you go. Awesome. So if there's no more questions before we get started, I will pass the mic over. Thanks, folks.
Thanks. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today for this webinar on energy benchmarking. My name is Khaled Isa. I'm a building energy analyst with the Asset Management Department at the BC Nonprofit Housing Association, or BCNPHA. Part of my role at BCNPHA is to assist our members and nonprofit societies with their energy benchmarking needs. And today I'm going to give a quick intro on energy benchmarking and also talk to you about how we at BCNPHA provide value to our members and nonprofit housing providers through our energy benchmarking service and more. So let's start by taking a quick look at the agenda. So yeah, we'll take a quick overview of the services provided by our asset management department and basically look at where benchmarking fits within these services. Then we'll do a brief intro to energy benchmarking and cover some important factors that can influence energy use at a site. After that, I'll go over our process for energy benchmarking at BCNPHA. And then we'll recap the reasons to energy benchmark and more specifically, why I think it's a great idea to benchmark with our asset management department. And of course, we'll leave 5-10 minutes or so at the end for Q&As. But just as Courtney mentioned, please feel free to ask throughout the presentation if you prefer. So our asset management department offers quite a comprehensive list of services that can really help you identify the right balance between maintaining your building or portfolio while reducing risk and long-term costs. This includes, of course, improving your building's energy performance as well. We have teams that are dedicated to each one of these services, from building condition assessments to capital planning, energy audits, and retrofit coaching, and last but not least, of course, property management software. So generally speaking, our energy benchmarking service is most commonly driven by our energy audits. But energy benchmarking can also be part of other energy management services. For example, if you implemented an energy retrofit project and looking to do some measurement and verification to quantify your savings, well, benchmarking can be applied in that case as well. So energy benchmarking is also recommended by some retrofit funding programs like the Columbia Trust Energy Retrofit Program and their Affordable Housing Renewable Energy Program. Mainly because it helps them establish early on a baseline to measure efficiency improvements against. So all this to say that energy benchmarking is not always dictated just by energy audits and can very much be part of other energy management services that we provide. So now I'm gonna briefly introduce energy benchmarking for those who are somewhat new to the topic. So yeah, if you look at the definition of benchmark on Google, it'll say that to benchmark is to evaluate or check something by comparison with a standard. So that's something in our case is a building's energy performance, which essentially is a measure of how much energy a building consumes to meet its operational and occupancy needs. And we're looking at the total energy consumed by all building systems. So this would include, boilers for space heating and domestic hot water. We're looking at ventilation systems, so fans and makeup air units, and of course, lighting and so forth. So generally, energy performance is based on the total energy consumption at a building. And we look at metrics for how we measure this performance or efficiency. So now that we clarified what the something is that we're checking when we benchmark, let's look at the standard part of the definition. So basically, what is the standard that we evaluate a building's energy performance against? And for that, there are a few options. The simplest one is to benchmark a building against its own historical performance. So we basically compare a building's performance against itself over time, trying to answer questions like how is the building's energy consumption trending? Or can changes in energy use be explained by weather changes from year to year? Or is there something more serious at play, say a failing piece of equipment or a noticeable change in building operations? Another approach is to compare a building's energy performance relative to a society's portfolio. So this would be more of an internal standard, if you may, in that we are comparing the performance of a building relative to a specific portfolio that the building is part of. This one can be quite insightful in that it helps our members and nonprofit housing providers prioritize their building energy retrofits, basically by ranking their buildings based on the energy performance and related costs. So this procedure has merit, especially with larger portfolios. The third option is to benchmark the building against an external database. There are a few examples of those, like the Building Performance Database, or BPD, which is maintained by the US Department of Energy, and the recently released Portfolio Manager Data Explorer, although these are more geared towards the US building stock. In Canada, we have energy consumption surveys that are updated regularly. A couple examples would be the survey of energy consumption of multi-unit residential buildings, or the more recent survey of household energy use from 2019, which has province-specific benchmarking data. So there are a number of data sources to benchmark against, but none of them is specific to the non-market housing stock in BC. This was a gap that we at BC MPHA identified and have been working to fill, which brings me to the next option and the last one. With this last option, we are able to rank the energy performance of the building against a representative sample of non-market buildings within BC. We basically compiled this data set for non-market multi-unit residential buildings. And of course, we're working towards expanding it to other building types. But ultimately, we aim to use the most relevant data sets when we benchmark a building or an entire portfolio. So when needed, we always revert back to NRCan survey data or any of the other sources mentioned earlier. So quickly recap, when we energy benchmark, we're basically evaluating the energy performance of a building against a reference point or standard to evaluate how efficient a building is running by comparison. So next, let's have a quick look at some of the factors that can affect the consumption at a building or a site. So there's a number of factors here that can really influence how much energy is used at a building. Three crucial factors are the building size, climate, and building type or use. But energy consumption can also be influenced by other factors. Again, they're listed here, like the age of the building, the type of construction materials, whether it's concrete versus wood, and of course, occupancy trends. Some of these factors, I would say, have dependencies between them. Think, for example, of building type and occupancy. You would expect the occupancy in a multi-unit residential building to be different from that in office buildings, for example. And this is more so, post-pandemic. So let's look at the top three factors on this list and how we can account for them when we measure and compare the energy performance of buildings. So if we're considering the size factor only, assuming all else is the same between two buildings, we know that larger buildings will generally use more energy. A 10-story residential building in Victoria will most likely use more energy than a similar 3-story building in the same region. So the question now becomes, how do we fairly compare the energy performance of these two buildings with different sizes? It won't be fair to say that the 3-story building is more energy efficient than the larger one. And this brings us to one of the most commonly used energy performance metrics, what we refer to as the energy use intensity, or EUI for short. Basically, what we do here is divide the building's energy consumption by its square footage to get a metric for how much the building consumes with square meter or square feet. Say we have four residential buildings A to D as an example, with the sizes and consumption shown on the chart to the left. We can see that the energy use is generally increasing with size, which is the expected trend. But when we want to compare the energy performance or efficiency of these buildings, we see that the one with the smallest consumption is the least efficient, since it has the highest EOI, or gigajoules per meter square. So it's really important to draw that distinction between energy consumption and energy efficiency. So this is essentially how we account for the building size when we want to compare the energy performance between buildings with similar characteristics. We divide or normalize by the square footage to level the playing field. Similarly, the climate zone that the building is in can significantly affect its energy use patterns. The buildings we work with are located throughout BC. And as you can see in this image, a building could fall under a number of climate zones, which here are categorized by heating demand, or HDD for short. The further north we are in BC, of course, the more heating energy that is expected to be consumed. So yeah, where you are in the province really matters a lot in terms of your building's energy footprint. So, you know, if a building in downtown Vancouver, for example, will have a very different heating demand or heating energy requirements than an identical building, say, in Port Nelson. So how do we account for buildings in different climate zones? We do that by basically weather normalization. There's a process called weather normalization, where we basically break down the building's energy consumption into what we label as a base load and a seasonal load. So let's assume a building's energy consumption follows this trend to the left on the plot there against temperature. We see a spike in energy use at the minimum and maximum end of the temperature range, with a relatively steady energy use in between. So these above baseload spikes basically represent the energy consumed for heating and cooling in this scenario. Of course, in reality, this type of plot will look more like what we see on the right, where the energy use will not follow, you know, an exact straight line. So instead, we do a line fit to the data to come up with an estimate for how much the heating and cooling energy consumed changes with heating and cooling demand. So we essentially relate the seasonal energy use to the outdoor temperatures and normalize the consumption, you know, with the corresponding heating and cooling demand. So, and this helps us to account for weather differences when comparing a building's energy consumption, you know, between buildings that are in different climate zones. So let's go to the third main factor affecting the energy consumption, and that's the building type. Here we're looking at energy performance data from thousands of buildings in the US that have been grouped by building type. And as you can see, the energy use can, or the energy efficiency can be quite different. So if we assume similar sizes and weather conditions, a refrigerated warehouse will, for example, use more energy than a multifamily building. And we expect a campus to use more energy than an enclosed mall. In this case, though, accounting for the building type is fairly straightforward, in that we avoid comparing or benchmarking buildings against those of a different type of use. So we don't compare the energy performance of a multi-unit residential building to a fire station, or that of a supermarket against a bank. And this applies even when the buildings are of similar size and location, because as we saw, the building type is a differentiating factor. Of course, more often than not, we at BC and PHA deal with residential properties, mainly multi-unit residential buildings, or MURBs for short, but we also encounter townhouses as well as detached homes. So now after this quick overview on energy benchmarking and the various factors that are relevant to a building's energy use, let's dive into how we benchmark buildings at BCMPHA. So at BCMPHA, for our benchmarking needs, we rely on Energy Star Portfolio Manager, or ESPM for short. This is a free online tool that you can access from any web browser. This can be on your computer, on your tablet, or on your phone. Organizations use ESPM as an energy management tool to track their energy consumption and also benchmark their buildings and portfolios. As of this year, there are more than 465,000 buildings on the platform. In 2019, there were more than 24,000 that are located in Canada. This number is definitely higher at this point. One of the really neat things about ESPM is their online web services offering. So for participating utility companies, which in BC would be BC Hydro and FortisBC, energy consumption data gets automatically uploaded onto ESPM for eligible buildings every billing cycle. So you basically just connect the ESPM virtual energy meter, be it electricity or gas, to the appropriate utility web service, and the energy data gets populated, starting generally with about 2 years of data, historical data, and onwards. At BCMPHA, we currently administer ESPM accounts for more than 180 societies, spanning about 839 properties as of today. And our portfolio is continues to grow at a decent pace. We're truly a BC-focused organization and department. The buildings that we benchmark are spread throughout the province, as you can see on the map here, with a table next to it listing the top 30 cities and municipalities. So as you can see, our reach is quite comprehensive within the province. So next, I'm going to go through the ESPM account creation process at BCMPHA. And also show you how we handle the entire process from start to finish. So there's a hierarchy to the account creating process that we follow. We basically start by creating an ESPM account for the society if they don't have one yet. And then we start adding buildings under the society's account. And finally, the last step is adding energy meters to the building's profile. So these can be virtual meters that represent the physical metering at the site and capture the whole building energy consumption. So this is the process that we follow at a very high level, but let's dive a little deeper into the more granular steps, again, from start to finish. So these are generally the steps that we go through to get us from point zero to the finish line, and I'll be going over each of them briefly. So the first step is we ask the society to sign a letter of disclosure for utility consumption. And this allows us to create the Energy Star Portfolio Manager account on their behalf and also link it to link the ESPM account to the utilities like BC Hydro and FortisBC. The letter also confirms that the energy consumption data will be handled with high confidentiality and used primarily for energy analysis at the request of the society, or for nonprofit sector performance tracking that will be done anonymously. But the letter also provides us with, building information that is required for setting up the ESPM account. So we're talking square footage, number of units at the site, and for MERBs, whether the residential suites are individually metered. This information on the metering layout is key to ensure that we have the proper setup in ESPM and that we are capturing the whole building energy to provide a reliable EUI or energy use intensity. We understand, of course, that in some cases, this information might not always be readily available to some societies, so we work with them to fill any gaps. Next, we review your most recent utility bills. And this is an important early step because it sets the stage for what the ESPM meter setup will look like. So one of the first things we check for are your utility rates. Depending on the utility rate, it lets us know which meters can be connected to utilities for automated uploads versus having to upload the meter consumption data manually. Also, if you mentioned in your disclosure form that the building's residential suites are metered separately, the billing review lets us also know if residential meter aggregation is possible on the rate based on the rate schedule. Next, once the energy metering layout in the building is understood, we use utility account information to basically set up the connection or send the connection requests to the utilities for automated uploads. But beyond the ESPM setup, the billing review also offers us an opportunity to look for ways to cut costs. So on the electricity side, for example, if you have high power factor or demand charges, we look at the feasibility of upgrading your equipment or shifting your electrical loads to reduce these costs. Also, if your common area meter, for example, is on a residential stepped rate, there could be an opportunity to save as well by switching to a commercial rate. These all are on a case-by-case basis, of course. It's an outcome from the bills review, but generally they require us to collect more data on these charges that go beyond the bill samples. So the bill review process allows us to establish the metering layout in ESPM, and we of course capitalize on this info to look for opportunities to cut your utility costs. Now that we have received the disclosure form, reviewed the bills, and we have a great idea about what the metering looks like, we proceed with the ESPM account creation. In this area, I like to think that we are leaps and bounds ahead of other organizations that do benchmarking in BC, in that we have the account creation process completely automated. Basically, the account and building information that we extract from the disclosure form and billing review gets fed into an Excel template. This is then read by a program that generates the ESPM accounts automatically. So if you have 20 buildings that you want to benchmark, the account creation process can be drawn back from requiring hours to less than an hour. And once the ESPM account setup is complete and the energy consumption data starts flowing into ESPM, we can move ahead with our energy analysis and benchmarking report. The energy analysis and benchmarking reports, this is where we provide a lot of insights that go beyond what ESPM offers. We actually tap into the ESPM database to pull out your building's info and energy consumption data, and that information gets fed to a report generator. And now I'm going to take a quick overview of the different parts of the report. One of the first things that you will come across in this report is a utility table. So this is basically a summary of your utility accounts, rates, and the building's energy performance. So you'll see things like your account and meter numbers, your annual averages for electricity and gas consumption, also your effective rates for electricity and gas, which is essentially is a one-figure representation of your energy charges by fuel type. We also list your building's EUI, or energy use intensity, as well as your energy cost index, which basically is your dollar amount spent on energy per square foot of building area. Next in the report, we dive deeper into your energy consumption data. So we break down your annual energy consumption by fuel type, and of course, base versus seasonal loads, just like we saw earlier. And this gives us an indication of what portion of your energy consumption is spent on space conditioning. We also compare your consumption to the previous year just to see what the trending looks like, and give you a breakdown of your energy cost and GHG emissions split based on the fuel type. In the monthly consumption section, that's the one at the bottom with the bar charts, we show you how your monthly energy use correlates with monthly heating demand, and how it has changed over a 2-year period if data permits. If your building has a noticeable cooling load in the summer, we're able to spot that as well through the spikes that we can see in electricity use during the warmest months. So in one snapshot here, you can tell where your energy use and cost are coming from. In the next report section, we basically calculate your EUI and show you how each fuel is contributing to your site's energy performance. For MERBs, we also show you how your building ranks within our internal EUI dataset. In this case, for example, this building was actually performing relatively well since it's sitting below the median EUI for similar buildings in DC. Then we finally provide you with an estimate for savings on your energy, cost, and GHG emissions if the consumption was reduced by a set percentage from each energy meter in ESPM. And that's percentage usually we look at around 15%. This can be pretty useful in guiding which energy retrofit projects you want to prioritize, whether it will be for your building's gas run systems, or should you target measures in your common areas first versus residential suites, etc. Now we can do this on a per building basis, or go further by generating this type of report for your entire portfolio when it gets benchmarked with us at BCM-PHA. We can accommodate that as well. So here, in addition to building specific reports, we have a portfolio summary that shows you how your buildings rank within that specific portfolio. Of course, this can be incredibly helpful if you are trying to put together a portfolio level energy management or retrofit plan, or if you're laying the groundwork to decarbonize your portfolio. A portfolio benchmarking report can be a pretty powerful tool in that regard. Finally, we share the ESPM account login with the society, but we don't just walk away. We continue to maintain the account, and we carry out tasks like data quality checks. For connected meters, for example, there can be occasions where a billing cycle update is missed, or a meter in ESPM loses its connection and requires, reestablishing that connection. So we handle that. We also help with data requests from energy consultants who are working on your business case for your site's energy retrofits. This data in ESPM also helps us tremendously with our advocacy for more retrofit funding and support for fuel switching projects, that can help reduce energy costs and GHG emissions, specifically from the non-market sector in DC. All in all, we view energy benchmarking as a step towards more informed decision-making for planning your energy retrofits. So at BCM-PHA, we like to view energy benchmarking as a continuous process on your journey to improve your building or portfolio energy performance. With the insights we get from energy benchmarking, we're able to conduct more effective energy audits. These are referred to as ASHRAE Level 1 or L1 audits. They tend to be focused on high-level overview of your energy consumption trends and a general understanding of your building systems. After a Level 1 energy audit, we help identify energy conservation measures for your building with the society's priorities factored in, of course. From there, we move on to the project coaching phase. Here we support the societies with securing a more detailed Level 2 energy audit from third-party consultants, as well as advise and apply for available funding to support your retrofit costs. And we continue with advising and reviewing consultant reports all the way to project implementation. Once projects are implemented and commissioned, we can start doing measurement and verification, basically to ensure that your savings are in line with the Level 2 study recommendations. And in a way, this brings us back full circle to the benchmarking start, in that we're going back to the energy consumption data that we started collecting early on to verify savings, but also continue to monitor the consumption changes in order to act early on should there be any barriers to realizing the potential savings. And guess
Sorry
what?
to interrupt. There's a question in the chat just before we move on too quickly.
Yes, please.
From Justine, it says, for the energy analysis and benchmarking reports, is this done through an internal process or did you use another tool to generate them?
All the tools were basically developed in-house, so it is very much an internal process.
All right, thank you.
So yeah, as I was saying, so at BCM PHA, we offer all these services free of charge to any nonprofit housing provider. So you don't have to be just a member. As long as you're a nonprofit housing provider, these services are free. And like I said, we have a highly skilled and dedicated energy team that will support you through all these phases from start to finish. So now I'm going to quickly recap reasons why you would want to energy benchmark your building or portfolio. The easy and quick answer is you can't manage what you don't measure. The energy benchmarking data informs us on which buildings are performing poorly, and that kicks off a process to act on these findings, by implementing energy retrofits to help improve the energy efficiency of the building. So benchmarking helps you better understand also your utility charges and how they arise. You can track your energy use over time. And with live data, we can also flag properties that deviate considerably from seasonal energy use trends on a billing cycle basis. This could be due to faulty equipment, for example, or some behavioral change by occupants. So the earlier this can be identified, the sooner a fix can be put in place. If you have a portfolio and want to prioritize your energy retrofits, benchmarking helps you prioritize your workflow so you can get the biggest bang for your buck, basically. But not all societies, of course, have large portfolios. So if you manage the one property, energy benchmarking is still helpful. It gives you an indication of how well your building is performing energy-wise compared to similar properties in BC. And lastly, but not least, energy benchmarking also allows you to establish a baseline for your building's energy consumption early on. So when projects are actually implemented, savings can be based on that established energy baseline. Another really important reason to start energy benchmarking now is, of course, the upcoming energy and carbon reporting mandate by the City of Vancouver. Which is expected to expand to Metro Vancouver. And I won't be surprised if we get to a point where energy and carbon reporting mandates are established provincially. And the good news is this reporting will be done directly through Energy Star Portfolio Manager, so through ESPM. And essentially, the way this works is you set up your buildings just basically through the process that I described. In ESPM, and then you share your data as read-only with the City of Vancouver's ESPM account. So the reporting itself will start for MERBs or multi-unit residential buildings above 100,000 square feet in 2025, which will require the total energy use from 2024. We're close to the end of January 2024 right now. So if you have buildings in Vancouver that meet this criteria, this is the right time to start working on this if you haven't. But of course, don't stress. At BCM PHA, we can help you with this process from start to finish. Then later in the following year, so in 2026, MERBs larger than 50,000 square feet will start reporting to the city their energy use and carbon pollution for the year 2025. So lastly, why benchmark with BCM PHA? For one, it's free of charge, as I noted earlier, but also worth noting is that we take care of the entire process once you provide the required form and bill samples. And after setting up your ESPM accounts, we continue to administer them and monitor them for data quality issues that require fixing. We also have a wealth of experience with non-market housing in the province. We've benchmarked buildings throughout the province and also established a sector-specific benchmarking data set that we are improving and growing over We also offer benchmarking reports and insights that go far beyond what ESDM offers. We basically complement ESDM with our analytics capabilities, and through that, add a ton of value to the data that we receive. And this empowers societies, with this information, it can guide how they go about their energy retrofits and management in general. And of course, when you benchmark with BCM PHA, you would already have access to all our free energy management services that can carry you basically from a level 1 energy audit all the way to verifying your energy savings following the implementation of efficiency upgrades. And finally, we will make sure that you are prepared for the city of Vancouver and any other upcoming reporting mandates. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to open the floor to questions and discussions. But yeah, also please feel free to reach out to me directly as well anytime via email or a phone call. If you have any questions related to benchmarking or any of our other energy services, you're also more than welcome to submit inquiries through the web link listed. And this can be again for benchmarking or any of our other energy services.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Do folks have any questions about any of this process? You're welcome to just unmute, raise your hand, and ask, or you can pop them in the chat and I can read them out for you. I like to give a long pause because I know typing sometimes takes a little bit of time.
It's all good. I'm actually curious to hear if there's maybe perhaps anybody in this webinar that have properties that already fall under the criteria for the carbon reporting in 2025. That would be interesting to know as well.
Thanks for joining us. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions come through, but if anything comes up, please feel free to email us. The emails are up on there, or find us on our website. There's lots of ways to get a hold of us, and we'll be sending out this recording to everyone who's registered. So if you had to leave early, hopefully you're watching it later on. One last chance for questions before we leave. We'll also be the last ones to leave this morning. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.